Imagine a day that you can speak to your friends and relatives on the telephone.
When housing is affordable and communities are mixed.
Imagine a day where we can treat bacterial infections.
With a pill or a simple injection.
When computers can help us forecast the weather.
Or help us understand how the earth moves beneath our feet.
When language and mobility rights are guaranteed in Canada.
Imagine a day when we can use our mobile devices to instantly send messages to one another.
Or turn digital images into photographs.
Imagine a day when we can manage incurable diseases like diabetes and HIV.
Or Canadians can move objects remotely while orbiting space.
Cars with no emission that can sense and stop accidents.
Imagine a day when university research can change the world.
Wait, we can, because it has.
Ontario research is making life better.
Communities stronger.
And the world a smaller place.
Investigating how agriculture responds to climate change.
Improving flight safety and human travel.
Exploring how music can help build communities.
Improving respiratory health.
Enhancing the environmental sustainability of the construction industry.
Strengthening maternal health.
Reducing CO2 emissions.
Exploring renewable energy.
And enhancing energy conservation.
Ontario research is strengthening northern communities through rail.
Beating cancer by figuring out how to deliver drugs to specific cells.
Ontario University research is enhancing social justice.
And strengthening civil liberties.
It's conquering autism and figuring out how play can strengthen teaching and learning. It's even using blood-encased gel ballistics to help solve crimes.
Yes, just like CSI.
Why does research matter?
Because ideas have consequences.
Literacy.
Cancer.
Heart disease.
Racism.
Bullying.
Antivirals.
Green energy.
Drug abuse.
Hunger.
Peace.
Solar power. That's why research matters.
Want to find out more?
Be imaginative. Join us.
Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this beautiful venue in downtown Kitchener. My name is Kevin Hall. I'm the Vice President of Research at the University of Guelph. A secret, it's Canada's best university, but there are three other universities here with us tonight, and I'd actually like to, on behalf of my colleagues, George Dixon, who's the Vice President of Research at the University of Waterloo, Abby Goodrum, who is the VP Research at Wilfrid Laurier, and Mona Nima, who is the Vice President at the University of Ottawa, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. We'd like to welcome you to the first edition of Research Matters. I'd also like to welcome those of you that are watching live on the webcast, and hopefully the jacket's straight and things are ready to go. Do I look good? This is okay? Yeah? Okay. George, Abby, and Mona and I have been working very hard with our colleagues across the province, all the Vice Presidents of Research, to develop this event series. And you can see up on the board at the left and right here, or you can see on the right, my right, your left. This is the first event that's going to be held in this series called Research Matters, and you can see there's a number of other locations that we'll be visiting over time with other universities being representative. And I would welcome you to attend any and all of those if you want a nice tour of Ontario. There's nothing like Sudbury in March, Oshawa in April, St. Catharines in April, and well, Toronto anytime is good, right? So please feel free to either look at these on the live webcast or in fact attend them. I'm delighted that we're launching this series in Kitchener. It's a community. The Kitchener-Waterloo Guelph region is a community that it really embraces the universities that are here. And the building we're in, which is owned by Communitech, is just a tribute to what can be done when universities work together with communities and with investors and the public. And it's a great thing to be opening here. So the event is part of this series called Research Matters. It's designed to get university researchers off, I thought it said something else, but off campuses and out into the public. So tonight you're going to see 4 fantastic presentations from great researchers who really want to connect with you in the audience, and we really encourage you as the evening goes on. You'll have a chance to provide feedback, to ask questions, and we really encourage you to do that. And those of you also watching on the webcast, you can connect via Twitter and Facebook somehow. I don't understand how that all works, but apparently you're going to be able to call in. So we encourage you to participate. You might even consider attending the other events as I mentioned earlier, and again the schedule's up there. And if you go online to the website for Research Matters on the COU website, you'll actually get a glimpse of who will be presenting at these other events. So you may just bookmark that in your calendar. Before I get started, I would like to invite the Mayor of Kitchener, Carl Zare, to say a few words. Mayor Zare has a long-standing appreciation of the relationship between universities and their surrounding communities, and I think again, Kitchener-Waterloo and the relationship with the community, it's a model for the rest of the country to follow, and we certainly try to do the same type of thing in Guelph, and we're getting there, but Kitchener-Waterloo certainly leads that. We're very fortunate to have him as a member of the advisory panel for Research Matters, and so Mayor Zare, we want to thank you for contributing your leadership and guidance to the project, and thank you for being here tonight, and we'd welcome you to say a few words.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. It should be a very fascinating evening. I'm looking forward to the discussion later on. I'm joined tonight by, there are two councillors here, Councillor Barry Vabanovich of the City of Kitchener and Councillor Dan Glenn Graham. I was pleased and honored to be asked to sit on the advisory board for Research Matters. And if for no other reason, it gives me an opportunity to rub shoulders with people who are always testing the boundaries of things. And a special welcome to those who are watching on the website tonight, or if you are here and not from this community. It really is a special community, I believe, with lots of buzz and momentum, and I hope you'll get a sense of that from tonight's presentation and discussion. As well, welcome to this great space in a building that was once the largest leather tanning facility in the British Empire. I can venture to say that it would not have that distinction if there had not been research conducted on the process of leather tanning at some time in earlier years, whether it was rudimentary or sophisticated research. Tonight's topic: what will life be like in 2030? And so as I look around the room, I'm going to guess that I could very well be the oldest person in the room. I'd first like to say that I hope to be here to see those amazing things that the researchers will have done by 2030, my 85th year. That's kind of scary, actually. In fact, it is research that has allowed me to live this long, and no doubt it will be research that will assist me in getting to the year 2030. Everyone in this room, everyone, knows the importance of research and how it influences all aspects of our lives. In my world, the municipal world, we are the beneficiaries of decades and centuries of research. Without research, we wouldn't have roads that can last for decades due to new materials and construction methods. We wouldn't have buses, trains, trucks, and equipment that are more energy efficient, resulting in lower costs and lower carbon emissions. Without research, we wouldn't have tap water that is safe, and you don't give it a second thought to use it for drinking and cooking. We wouldn't have computers to store our data and manipulate the data to have the most appropriate information to make informed and responsible decisions. Without research, we wouldn't have innovative methods of planning and constructing our neighborhoods, whether they be in the suburbs or in the inner city. And we wouldn't have the extensive and technologically advanced health facilities that look after our citizens. And without research, the quality of life, we wouldn't have the quality of life we are fortunate to enjoy. And finally, without research, we wouldn't have the BlackBerry 10 to look forward to. Yes, of course. So what will life be like in 2030? We could very well have BlackBerry 100 implanted somewhere up here, which would be less cumbersome than the one on my belt right now or in a lady's purse. We will still be very busy people, Who knows, maybe even busier. We will have more information, which could be a good thing or not, depending on your perspective. And in 2030, governments, at least local governments, which I can speak for, will be asking citizens for even more public engagement on issues affecting their daily lives. And we will still be astounded and impressed by the new inventions and gadgets of life that came about only because of research. So with you, I'm really looking forward to the discussion this evening and find out what our lives will be like in 2030. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Mayor Zare. I think while I make a few remarks, we're going to have some rejigging here of the computer. So good evening, everyone. I'm Abby Goodrum. I'm Vice President Research at Wilfrid Laurier University. I and my fellow Vice Presidents created the Research Matters campaign for some very straightforward reasons. We live in a province with 21 publicly funded universities. And university research, as you've heard, it shapes how all of us currently live and work and play, but also how our children will do the same. So we've got a responsibility as university administrators to let Ontarians know what's happening on their campuses with respect to research. The people of this province have every right to take immense pride in the world-leading research that happens here. It's amazing research, and it's research that you funded. So these Research Matters events are designed to give Ontarians unprecedented access to university researchers and their research, and to allow you to learn about the important and valuable ideas and to stay informed about where all of this research is heading. And I don't know of another place in the world where so many universities have worked so closely together on this kind of public outreach initiative. It's amazing. We generally compete with each other, but in this instance, we've collaborated. And I'd like to echo Kevin's invitation that he made earlier. We want you to be a part of this conversation. So do please find us on Facebook, on the web, and follow us on Twitter. And there's another way that you can all join us in this discussion. When you sat down tonight, you may have noticed a small ballot with a question on the back. Maybe you're sitting on it now. That question on that ballot is the same question that researchers will be answering tonight. What do you think life will be like in 2030? We'd love to have your responses. I'll tell you the same thing that we told our researchers. You're welcome to talk about what you hope life will be like in 2030, or what you worry it will be like, or you can even tell us merely just what you expect that it will be like. Also, feel free to ask questions and make suggestions on that ballot. Contribute in any way to this conversation. We want to know what you think. You're welcome to fill in your ballots now, or if you prefer, you can wait until you've heard some of the speakers or all of the speakers this evening. We're going to collect them at the end of the evening, and we're going to post some of the most interesting and provocative responses on our Facebook page and on Twitter. Okay, so about tonight. You're going to hear from 4 researchers. They're each from a different field of study. They're each from a different university. And each researcher will speak for 15 minutes about how they envision life in 2030. Then we'll invite all 4 researchers to come up to the stage, and they'll take questions from you. And we're going to do our best to wrap things up by 8:30. Okay? So now I'm delighted. Ian Klugman has agreed to moderate tonight's event. Ian's the president and CEO of Communitech right here, which is a not-for-profit organization that supports technology companies in the Waterloo and Guelph region. But more than that, really more than that, Ian's been a champion and a guru of connecting university research with the spheres of business, with government, and with the broader public. And we're very glad and very, very lucky to have him here tonight. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Ian for allowing us to use Communitech for our opening reception. Ian, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you all very much for joining us. You know, research matters. It's an interesting question. And I think it's not so much a question, it's something that many of us truly believe when we think about some of the fundamentals that have already been raised. But research really does matter. And I think that what's really exciting about this evening, and I've had an opportunity to get a preview of some of the presentations, is we're going to learn about some of the very transformative and fundamental ways that research affects our everyday life in the future of our lives going forward. I think often we tend to think about research as being something that's conducted in a lab, something where people wear funny coats and clothes and shoes. Those old Intel ads didn't do much to help us with those kinds of myths. I think that people think about research as being disruptive. They tend to think about it as something that's not really sure what those people are doing. But research not only matters in the kind of changes that it makes and impacts our lives, but research also matters because it makes us a beacon for attracting the smartest researchers, the smartest scientists, and the smartest students from around the world to come to Ontario. And it's that role as a talent magnet, and it's a combination of what it does in advancing knowledge, but also in bringing the smartest people here to this country, to this province, that is so important for our long term. This really is our natural resource. This is more important than oil and natural gas and iron ore. This resource that we have because of the tremendous research that we have going on in our province that leads to the kind of talent that we're able to develop here in this province is what's going to ensure our long-term prosperity. And so when people talk about research and they think about a laser and they think about shaving cream in a can and they think about being able to live longer, it's really only half the equation. It is so important for our long-term prosperity as a province. So anyway, without further ado, we're going to kick it off with our first presenter. I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome Ajay Hebel. Of course, Ajay is from the University of Guelph, and his focus is on the relationship between musical improvisation and stronger communities. Please join me in welcoming Ajay.
Thanks very much. So what will life look like in 2030 from the point of view of my research? I want to suggest that in 2030, we will learn to see improvisation as a vital tool for building sustainable communities, for promoting social cooperation, and adapting to unprecedented change. My talk today is going to be divided into 3 brief segments. The first one is called Imagine. So, imagine, if you will, a world where artists can make a living wage in the marketplace. Better yet, imagine a world where artists are at the center of broad public debate and policy decisions about things that will influence and shape the way we understand our lives. Imagine, if you will, a world where artists are recognized not only as leaders in the cultural arena, but perhaps more suggestively, as people who've reconfigured the very social relations of knowledge, as people who've brought together new and old forms of expertise, as people who have made amazing new things happen. Imagine, if you will, a world where people listen to one another. Imagine, if you will, a world where there is trust, humility, social understanding, responsibility. Imagine, if you will, a world where people, yes, where people actually get along. Now, I know I'm probably sounding a bit utopian, but I'm not going to apologize for that. After all, why should it be difficult for us to imagine a world where people get along? Why is it that activists who are struggling for a better world are so often told to resign ourselves to the world as it is? Right? Why are we so often told that no other future is or ever will be possible? I don't buy into that, and I hope you don't either. I want to draw my inspiration from Robin Kelley, whose quotation, "The map to a new world is in the imagination," inspires me here, from his absolutely amazing book, Freedom Dreams. Kelley is a brilliant African-American historian, and in his book, Freedom Dreams, he talks about the role that hope and the imagination have played in struggles for African-American people. So in his book, Kelley talks about how from a very early age, he was taught to see life as possibility. And like Kelley, I'm addressing my words today to those of you who are bold enough still to dream. right? Those of you who are bold enough still to dream. Like Kelly, I draw my inspiration from the power of dream, the power of hope. And like Kelly in his book, I'm calling on all dreamers to work towards a more inclusive vision of valued social practices. So for me, that's one source of inspiration. Another source is the great musician, band leader, Astro Black philosopher and poet Sun Ra. In case you don't know about Sun Ra, he was this amazing jazz musician who claimed to be from the planet Saturn. And he was also a poet, and in his poem Imagination he wrote, "Imagination is a magic carpet upon which we may soar to distant lands and climes, and even go beyond the moon to any planet in the sky. If we came from nowhere here, why can't we go somewhere there?" Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like offhand rhetoric and space-age futurism from an eccentric and marginalized figure in jazz history. Well, I'd like to suggest that really it's anything but. Despite being dismissed in most institutionalized accounts of jazz history, Sun Ra remains, in my mind, one of the most pioneering and influential musicians in the history of the music. And his words and his ideas deserve our respectful attention. So for Ra, nowhere here is an apt and deadly serious descriptor of the dead-end, earthbound life situations in which African American people, and more generally, marginalized and aggrieved populations found themselves. A world of violence, a world of oppression, a world of racist constraint. Somewhere there, by contrast, represents a place of hope, a place of genuine possibility. Why indeed can't we go somewhere there? That's really the question I want us to think about today. Why really can't we go somewhere there? The talk today that I'm going to give draws largely on work that I've been doing as the director of a large-scale research project called Improvisation, Community, and Social Practice, or ICASP for short. ICASP brings together 35 researchers from 20 different institutions around the world to study the social implications of improvised music. It also forges partnerships with a wide range of community-based organizations, again, in cities all throughout the world. My talk today will also draw its inspiration from work I've been doing for the last 20 years as the artistic director and founder of the Guelph Jazz Festival. This is a festival that prides itself on presenting improvised music. Now, in both of these contexts, the work I've been doing with ICASP and the work I've been doing with the Jazz Festival, I've come to learn that other kinds of future are indeed possible. Right? Other kinds of future are indeed possible. And this is one of the things that improvisation teaches us. Improvisation, in fact, teaches us to enact the very possibilities that we envision. Right? Improvisation teaches us to enact the very possibilities we envision. Cultural studies scholar Ian Eng has said that one of the most urgent predicaments of our time can be described in deceptively simple terms. She says, how are we to live together in this century? Right? How are we to live together in this century? So, how we choose to live and to do things together, how we sustain bonds and reclaim history, how we adapt to unprecedented change, how we choose to create a shared future, how we remain attentive to our responsibility to build the world we hope to inhabit, how, to return to the words of Sun Ra, we go somewhere there. I want to suggest that improvised music is a provocative and powerful site for sounding such questions about how. Right? For sounding such questions about how. And in an era when we're being told to, in an era where there's kind of increasing pressure to conform to narratives that get promulgated by dominant knowledge-producing elites, in an era when entrenched positions and settled conditions crowd out any kind of dissent or opportunities for change, it seems to me that these questions about how are absolutely vital. Indeed, we live in a transcultural context where there is, I would say, an urgent need for new modes, new visions, and even new soundings of social cooperation. We live in an era when diverse peoples and communities of interest are struggling to forge affiliations across cultural divides. And in that context, I want to suggest that the participatory and civic virtues of engagement, dialogue, trust, respect, and community building that are inculcated through improvised music take on a particular urgency. Part 2, improvise. The core hypothesis of my talk today, and indeed of the ICAST project, is that musical improvisation is a vital model for political, cultural, and ethical dialogue and action. Taking as a point of departure performance practices that can't readily be scripted, predicted, or compelled into orthodoxy, I want to suggest that the innovative working models of improvisation that have been developed by creative practitioners have helped to promote a dynamic exchange of cultural forms and to encourage new, socially responsible forms of community building across national, cultural, and artistic boundaries. So, what is it we're talking about when we talk about improvisation? Well, let me give you some working definitions. For us at the ICAST project, we think about improvisation as something that involves the creation and the development of new, unexpected, and productive co-creative relations among people. It teaches us to make a way out of no way by cultivating the capacity to discern hidden elements of possibility, potential, hope, and promise, sometimes even in the most discouraging of circumstances. Working without a written score or script, improvisers work together to envision and enact something new, to enrich their experience in the world by acting upon it and changing it, in the process creating things that would not otherwise have come into existence. Now, the work that I've been doing at the Guelph Jazz Festival over the years often brings together musicians who will come together for the first time, never having met before. They often come from different musical contexts, different cultural contexts. Let me play you one example. This is from a 2009 edition of the Guelph Jazz Festival. It's a short video clip that I'll just play for you now. Now, the musicians in that clip came from Ethiopia, Mali, Mexico, the Netherlands, Canada, and the USA. They had never met before coming together on stage in front of that audience. And as you can hear, they came from different musical backgrounds and different cultural backgrounds. And they were able to create absolutely wondrous music. And more so, they did so with no prearranged musical direction, right? They didn't sit down before the concert and say, we're going to play in the key of C, or we're going to start with a groove and do something else, or we're going to play in this time signature. They were able to come together with no conversation beforehand. The other thing is they had no language in common. In that group of people, there was no single language that they all spoke together. And yet they created absolutely amazing music, which you've just heard. So what does that tell us, right? What does that tell us about what it means to negotiate difference within the context of a community? What does it mean in terms of issues such as trust, social obligation, the ability to adapt in real time to what's going around you, the willingness to accept the challenges of risk and contingency? Right? It seems to me that these are really profound issues, and in fact that there's a lesson to be learned here in that moment when musicians come together like that from all around the world and make improvised music. There's a lesson there, and I think it's a lesson, to go back to Ian Eng, the cultural theorist I quoted earlier, who talks about one of the most urgent predicaments of our time. There's a lesson about how best we might get along in a globalized world. Right? And to me, it seems like that's something worth dreaming about. Part 3, hope. The great free jazz bassist William Parker says, "In order to survive, we must keep hope alive." I think William Parker is telling us there that hope remains an absolute necessity in the face of the degradations that threaten to beset aggrieved populations all around the globe. Right? That hope remains an absolute necessity. Now, if the ability to cultivate resources for hope is something we see in improvised music in the examples I've given you earlier, for example, with the musicians who've come from all around the world, well, that sense of hope is also very powerfully registered in some of the outreach activities associated with the improvisation community and social practice research project. And I don't have much time to talk about these, but I'll just mention 2 brief examples. One of our research team members, who may be familiar to you, Pauline Oliveros. Oliveros is a well-known composer, improviser, accordionist. In fact, one of the most famous women composers of the 20th century, also a brilliant improviser. She has developed a software program that allows people who have severely limited mobility to create improvised music. This project is called Adaptive Use Musical Instruments for the Physically Challenged. And if we're thinking about life in 2030 and what life might be like in the future, it seems to me that there's something extraordinary here. There's extraordinary potential in the work that Pauline and her team of researchers are engaged in terms of creating new opportunities for access to music making for people who've been denied that opportunity in the past, right? So people who have not, essentially bodies that have been silenced are now able to create music. So imagine the implications for the future. The second outreach initiative that I want to talk about just briefly is a partnership that's been formed in Guelph with a social service organization called Kids Ability Center for Child Development. Kids Ability is an organization that works with kids who have physical and developmental disabilities. And the ICAST project has partnered with Kids Ability to run a number of workshops on improvisation. And in 2011, we had the great privilege of having Jane Bennett, Juno Award winner, multiple award winner, Jane Bennett come and serve as a year-long improviser in residence at the University of Guelph. It was really quite an honor. And while in Guelph, she worked with about 10 different social service organizations in the community, including Kids Ability. While she worked with Kids Ability, she would mentor the kids there, run a series of workshops, and those workshops culminated in a public performance. And it wasn't just any public performance, it was a public performance at the Guelph Jazz Festival, at the festival's biggest event. So it's an event on the Saturday of the festival where we close down the street, have a big tent, and there are thousands and thousands of people. These kids got up on stage in front of an audience and played to thousands of people. And it was tremendously moving, right? Tremendously powerful experience. Meanwhile, we have our student researchers documenting the event. We have them doing follow-up interviews, surveys, questionnaires, and so on. And we know from the surveys, we know from the interviews that we conduct with the parents, with the kids, with the staff, with the musicians who've been running the workshops, we know just how powerful this work is. We know that the research we're doing matters. We know that it matters because we're touching people's lives. We're reaching populations who rarely get a chance to shine. Now, there's much more about both of these projects, the Adaptive Use Musical Instruments Project and the partnership with Kids Ability on the ICAST website, which you can find here, so improvcommunity.ca. I've also brought a book which documents Jane Bennett's residency and includes a series of videos made by an amazing videographer, Don Matheson. And the video in particular that deals with Jane's work at Kids Ability is called Katie's Song. So if you're interested, I would direct you to the ICAST website, or I brought about 20 copies of the book. They're free. You can pick one up. You can learn about the work we've been doing in the community, in particular with Jane's residency. So, life in 2030. Imagine what life might look like in 2030 if we were able to mobilize the resources, the spirit of inquiry and experimentation, the necessity for robust dialogue associated with improvised musical performances. And imagine if we were to do so in the service of sounding new models of social cooperation. Imagine the ideals that might get nourished. Imagine the relationships that might get fostered. Imagine the lessons that might get learned. Right? If we were able to mobilize those resources that I've been saying are associated with improvised music. If struggles for social change often take as one of their most salient manifestation an allegiance to forms of artistic expression that can't readily be accommodated using dominant frameworks of understanding, then our success in solving some of the most critical problems we're facing now and in the future may well depend on our ability to break out of conventional recurrent solution patterns. It may well depend, in short, on our ability to imagine, to hope, and to improvise. Life in 2030, why indeed can't we go somewhere there? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Ajay. And next up is Andrew Pelling. Andrew Pelling's lab at the University of Ottawa works at the intersection of several emerging fields, including molecular biology, nanotechnology, biochemistry, and engineering. Sounds kind of futuristic? I think so. Andrew.
Thanks a lot. Okay. Well, first off, thanks to the organizers and the VPRs for your vision in making this sort of thing happen. I want to ask everybody in this audience right now, how many of you know what these two boards are? Or anybody? So what are they? Arduino. What is the other one? Just shout it out. Okay, well, we know what one of them is. I'll be asking again later, and it will be a test, so we'll deal with that then. One of the things that's always absolutely thrilled me about science are the unanswered questions. It's not so much what we know, but it's what we don't know that I find so fascinating. And you know, as a kid, I was one of these geeky kids, okay, really into sci-fi, cyberpunk, and you know, hacking and computers and that sort of thing. And it's been really interesting in recent years, the emergence of this term called biohacking. Anybody heard of that term, biohacking? Anybody heard of the term hacker? Hacking, usually in a very negative context. The hacking, really at its root, is just repurposing something, whether it's hardware, software, repurposing it for something it wasn't intended to be. And biohacking, in a very general sense, is we can draw a very literal analogy between software code and our genetic code. So if we were to change the genetic code of an organism, you essentially can biohack it. You can change its function by messing with DNA. And in fact, we do this in the lab all the time, and people are doing this at home, in fact. And I'll just give you one just quick example, because it's actually not what I want to talk about really in general. You know, this is something we did in our lab. We took some human cells, we incorporated jellyfish DNA into them. This DNA encodes for a protein which emits green light. We then coaxed them to grow on this artificial substrate, a little Lego men. And now what was a human epithelial cell is now a human jellyfish hybrid that's acting as a skin on a synthetic piece of plastic. And I know that sounds completely bananas, but it's part of a larger mission of my lab. And this is where I think it gets interesting. Our bodies are incredibly dynamic, right? They're mechanical. And most of you are awake right now, and even though you're just sitting in a chair, your body is undergoing stretch, contraction, you're breathing, your blood is flowing. Are there any runners in the crowd? Okay, I'm a runner, and you learn very quickly that mechanical forces have a huge impact on your body, both causing pain, but also changing bone structure, changing muscle structure, and your cardiovascular system. Physical forces have an unbelievably important role in biology. It's not just genetics, it's not just biochemistry, but physical, tactile forces can manipulate biology. And so we're very interested in this, and something I've been very curious about for many years is, can we draw an analogy between physical hacking? So this is like old school hacking. You're pulling apart hardware, or you want to break into CSIS, but you don't use the internet, you actually physically break into CSIS, right? Or you steal passwords by looking over somebody's shoulder, as simple as that, right? Physical hacking, can we physically hack a living system, an organ? And in fact, the answer happens to be yes. And we spend an obscene amount of time in my lab building devices and hardware in order to achieve this. And I'll just give you two examples here. On the left is, or on the right is a small triangular tip, and that's touching cells in a very specific way, and they light up green. So we're actually manipulating the genetic or the biochemical signaling going on in these cells. And you have to stroke them. You can't just push on them. You trigger a different pathway that way. Or you can stretch cells, mechanically stretching them, and we can get them to align and organize, and there's all sorts of physical effects that go on here. And let's go to another extreme. On the top here, you can actually see, sorry about that, you can actually see a mouse heart at the very top in my lab, and what we're doing is we're decellularizing it. So you're pulling, this is a dead organ, we're pulling all the cells out, and what you're left with is this white scaffold. And what you can see in the bottom there is another university, their research has been focused on developing regenerating organs. You can put new heart cells back into this organ or new lung cells and create a functional organ. So that's fascinating, right? It's regenerative medicine maybe at its finest. When I first saw this sort of work and when we first started doing this in my lab, the first question to me, honestly, was why do I have to put heart cells back in? I can put anything back into this thing. I can repurpose this organ. I can create, maybe I can put kidney cells in there and create a kidney or heart-shaped kidney. Maybe I can put nerve cells in there. Why do I have to put animal cells back in that? I have a scaffold that I can do anything with. And the possibilities is what is exciting here. And here's one very extreme example. This started out honestly as a joke, and we were just joking around and curious, could we make this happen? So on the top, you can see a piece of apple. It's the white square, and we've decellularized it. We've pulled all this nuclei and all the genetic material out. What you're left with is just cellulose. And on the right, you can see another pink square. That's that same piece of apple after a week in our culture growing muscle cells into it, mouse muscle cells, in fact. And so this is, again, a very wild and pretty extreme example, but there's a lot of very interesting science here. Number one, why on earth are mouse muscle cells growing in this? And there are questions about what sort of biochemistry is involved in that and all the genetics that's involved in that. But number two, we now have a natural, organic, renewable, cheap, synthetic or biologically compatible substrate on which we can grow cells. So can we make implants out of this? Can we regrow organs out of this in a very cheap and very accessible way? And can I go buy an orchard just for fun now? So, okay, so that's kind of my work and this sort of the context of my work. But what we're very interested in as well is engaging the public. We work very closely with many different artists and scientists, sociologists and psychiatrists. And something that we take a lot of pride in is that we make our equipment from the ground up as much as possible. We write our own code and we manipulate these biological systems ourselves. And so what this has sort of led to is our participation in the maker movement and in many sort of maker forums. And we go to these maker fairs, which are populated with people who are just making things, anything, and we share this information. How do you make an cheap biological incubator at home, out of garbage? And that's one of the things up there. How do you decellularize cells? How do you make your own microscope literally out of garbage? This incubator we built, the parts are from garbage we found in the hallways of our building. Okay, and so why we're doing this is there's this very interesting movement going on now where citizens are becoming actively involved in science, so-called DIY bio, where people are going home in their garages and basements, setting up their own labs, or they're doing this as communities and participating in the scientific process. Because nowadays, it's not hard to make devices. In fact, that's where this Arduino comes in, right? And on one side, you've got a Raspberry Pi, and I brought two. I just want to kind of hold them up here and just give you a sense of how big they are. So these are what's amazing about these things, I probably should have taken them out first. So here's the Raspberry Pi, here's the Arduino. Okay, so this Arduino, 25 bucks. Okay, you can buy it, and what it basically is a pretty simple microcontroller. You hook up some sensors and hardware, and you can build robots. In fact, you can build a satellite out of this thing, using this thing. And I'll just show you that in a minute. What's amazing about this is this was not built and designed by electrical engineers. This was produced by artists, interaction designers, okay? Not your traditional scientists. This is a Raspberry Pi. This is a $35 fully functional computer. HDMI output for your HD video, internet, USB ports, audio, everything you need right here, 35 bucks. We all have keyboards, monitors, and mice at home. Here's your computer, 35 bucks. What's amazing about this item is it's open source hardware and code. You don't have to buy this. Go on the internet, download the schematics, make your own board if you really want to, and you can produce this object. You can manipulate it, hack it, mod it, however you want, and people are doing this. And you can build essentially anything. Your imagination is what's limiting what comes out of this. And I just want to really make a point here about how anybody can do this. Okay, so top left there's a blue box, that's a satellite. I think that's ArduSat, or it might be FunSat, I can't remember. ArduSat is supposed to launch early 2013. Last year, 2 kids in the UK sent up a satellite based on the Raspberry Pi, went up to near space, took some pictures, crashed into the Earth, had a transponder on it, they found it, it was intact, they uploaded the videos to the internet. 2 kids. Okay, on the bottom there is Sylvia. If you have children, no, if you're a human being, you should go to her website, sylviashow.com. This is an 8-year-old little girl building robots, devices, showing people how to do it and teaching them about the theory of what's going on in here and the componentry. And she's having a great time doing it. And it's an absolutely inspirational website. I'm just amazed by her. In the middle there is Erin Kennedy, or Robot Girl. She's based in Ottawa. She's very well known for building these little robots and all sorts of actually really wonderful codes and things she's come up with. She helped my wife and I build a violin with an Arduino in it that would, when you played the violin, you would be accompanied by bird songs. So she's an amazing person. On the top there with the pink hair is Lady Ada. She runs a website, Adafruit, which is an incredible resource for stuff like this, but also is full of tutorials, video tutorials, information, and how to learn how to make this stuff. But it doesn't just kind of stop with robots and satellites. You can build your own open source UV vis IR spectrometer, which is very useful in the lab. You can build your own PCR. Okay, again, if you're doing genetics, this is something that typically would cost thousands of dollars. Here it is, it's open, 500 bucks. All the instructions, all the plans, all the codes online, free and available to anybody. And people are taking advantage of this. So I was thinking, what's happening in 2030, what's the future? I think if we want to know, we should actually look back at the past. We right now are living the IT revolution, aren't we? Right now. And what's the history of that? Well, what was going on in the garages of people in the 1920s and 1970s, right? You have people, university dropouts, people who are curious and just want to know, can I make this thing, whatever it is? Can I solve this problem? Not because some venture capital firm has strategically invested in them, not because this is part of an economic action plan, but because they're curious. Can it be done? And that's why these guys are working. And this revolutionized our lives. And so, if you think about it, this citizen science, and I mean people like you, who are actively involved in science, is actually yielding some amazing results. And I don't have time to talk about everything. There's just 3 examples there. Foldit is a great example of citizen science. Anybody heard of Foldit? Okay, a few. This was actually presented to the public as a video game to determine protein structure. So the 3-dimensional shape of a protein in your body is intimately linked to how it functions. So it's really important to understand the shape of a protein in 3D, but it's very difficult to figure that out. And this is presented as a video game for the internet, for many people to play, to here's a sequence of amino acids. How is the best way is it going to fold? And it's a game, so you get points and things like that. And one of the first sequences they put out there into the wild was a sequence for an HIV protein. This protein had been studied for about 15 years, and the structure had not been determined during that 15-year period. So this sequence was put out, one of the pilot studies on this program. Within 10 days, the public solved that structure. Ended up as a Nature paper in 2011. Right now, there are all sorts of games on there, being presented on Foldit, and one of them is design synthetic peptides that have pharmaceutical or therapeutic function. I mean, it's amazing. Citizenry is being involved actively in the scientific process. So I just want to give one more example of citizen science, and I think this to me is one of the most inspirational TED Talks I've ever seen and pieces of work I've ever seen. Anybody know Mick Ebling or have seen this talk at all? Okay, this is your homework. Go tonight, write this down, take a picture, whatever you need to do to remember this slide. Go home and watch this talk. It's 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and it's on TED. So on the bottom right, you've got an artist named Tempt. He's a graffiti artist. He developed ALS and became fully paralyzed. And Mick Ebling and others sort of knew of his story and figured, well, Stephen Hawking has these computers with eye tracking that allows him to communicate with the world. And they figured, well, that sort of technology should be available to someone in his position. And of course, he didn't qualify for it for many reasons, and the insurance company wouldn't pay for this. And Mick and the people he brought together, who weren't medical devices people, who weren't academics, just hackers, coders, people who were willing to spend a bit of energy and time, came together and with the simple question, can we make this device? Can we unlock this artist? Can we allow him to communicate with the world around him using technology? And again, the answer is yes. And not only did they create this iWriter, but it's all open source. You can go online to Instructables or iWriter.org, download all the plans, download all the componentry, all the code. It's all available. It's about $250 worth of stuff you need to buy. But seriously, for a device like this that's going to unlock a paralyzed person, that's nothing, right? Really, it's absolutely nothing. And it's freely available. And that's what's absolutely amazing here, okay? And this isn't a global multinational medical devices company. This is just a bunch of people who have authority issues and are, bored but at the same time are curious. That's what is at the heart of all of this sort of work I've tried to show you today. It's curiosity. And I think, as a society, as Canadians, we need to value curiosity just for the sake of curiosity, not because there's a product or not because there's an application at the end of that, but let's be curious just for the sake of being curious, right? Let's ask those questions. And not just in our children and not just in ourselves, but in everybody, our elders, everybody should be able to ask these questions. And I think when you foster curiosity, curiosity breeds innovation. Economic innovation, environmental innovation, healthcare innovation, innovation in the arts, in the sciences, the social sciences, and the humanities. Just by being curious, and it's so simple. And I think, I'm not going to answer the question, what is life going to be like in 2030, because I think you should go out and get actively involved in these processes. There is nothing stopping you. Everything is available. You can either participate with researchers through websites, you can build your own lab. I actively work with many of these DIY bio people who are doing it in their homes, and many other researchers do as well. The opportunities are there. So I think you should go out. You should make the discoveries. You should drive the future and what's going on. And you should define what happens in 2030. Because we can. You can. And that's, I think, I just want to kind of end with that thought. My work is supported by many people, but really, at the heart of it, I work with an amazing group. Right now, it's about 15 people in my lab, and they're the ones who drive the work we do. It's their enthusiasm and curiosity that feeds me. And with that, I'd just like to thank you very much for your attention, and thanks again to the organizers for putting this together.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm curious. I'm really curious about this next guy. Next up, we have Amir Kajapur. And of course, we all know about the smart car from the University of Waterloo. But what about the intelligent car? Amir.
Okay. All right, so what I would like to talk about is what cars are going to look like in 17 years from now in 2030. With cars, however, we are dealing with technology. And it's a little bit different than science, because in science, we try to discover something that exists. In technology and engineering, we try to do research in order to develop something that does not exist, but there is a need for it, or we can dream of. So in order to understand exactly what is going to happen in the next 17 years with cars, I'm going to pose this question. What is the ideal car of the future? What do we expect to see in cars? Because that way we can definitely achieve it. So anyone, what do you see in the cars in future? Can fly? That's a good idea. So if we ask this question from ourselves, and if we can come up with a good answer, I think we should be able to see what is going to happen in the next 17 years. So here's what I think. The cars of the future, or the ideal car of the future, is the one that is connected. It's crash-free, does not crash, has zero emission, is 100% efficient, although it's against the laws of physics. It's recyclable, it's comfortable, and provides the handling of a race car, right? It's a big, big list of expectations. And now my question is, can we achieve all those? And also, 17 years is just a blink in the eyes of history, right? It's just a moment. So in order to answer this question, how much of that we can achieve, I would like to go back 17 years and then look at the cars, favorite cars at that time. These are the cars in 90s, and many of them are still on road, which is, I guess, marvelous. We pay probably for the less than the renovation of a bathroom or a kitchen to buy a car, and then it will last 17 years. We put 300, 400 kilometers on it, and it's still working, right? But if you look at those cars, current cars, probably many of them still look the same. But if we look inside, there has been huge, huge changes since 90s to now. If you look at the engines now are much smaller. They can produce much higher power. If you look at the body of the cars, we have shaved a lot of mass out of them. However, we have not sacrificed anything from the safety of those cars. In terms of the crashworthiness of current cars, they are much, much better than those cars in 17 years ago. So if you think about, again, connectivity, at that time probably we didn't have any cell phone. But now when you get into your car, there is a seamless connection between the car and your cell phone. Many cars have it. So there has been lots of changes. And also, when we think about what is happening at this time, we are at the crossroad of technology. If you think about communication, communication now is everywhere. We have many, many tools that now we are using it. However, they have not been in the car. If you think about the new powertrain, electricity, electric cars, hybrid cars, these are all the new stuff that now we have. However, they are very, very in their infancy. If you think about the number of electric cars that are sold now, 50,000 in the US in 2012 compared to 14.5 million cars that are sold in the US. So in the next 17 years, we should expect to see a lot of those, again, the list of expectations happening. Now, if you think about, again, better handling and comfort, yes, there is a race car on the right-hand side. It's fantastic. It has a beautiful handling, but we have some cars that can provide both comfort and handling, but it's limited to some cars. Now, can we make it more affordable? Can we have in more car in the next 17 years? Now, the connectivity and communication, I guess, is going to be the biggest change in automotive technology. Imagine that you are stuck in that traffic and the cars are not talking to each other. You have no clue what has happened maybe a kilometer ahead of you. But imagine that the cars can talk to each other, can pass some key information. That key information might be the road condition, might be an accident that has happened a kilometer again ahead of you. Now, if I know exactly what has happened, I can be way, way more proactive. So connectivity and communication is going to have a huge, huge role in increasing the safety of the future cars in terms of lives, in terms of accidents, and the whole idea of crash-free cars. It comes from knowing our environment, or the vehicle can understand what is happening around it. So here are some examples and some research that now is happening, and we are hoping to see them in the next few years. You are driving on a highway on the left and the right side, and then the cars can communicate with each other, can generate a network. And then once you have that network, you can do a lot. You can connect to each other, you can talk to each other, you can understand exactly what is happening. If you want to make a lane change, obviously the vehicle can let you know that yes, I'm going to pass you, be careful. You have heard about Google Car, and now probably you also saw Toyota autonomous car. So we have many of those in the laboratory level. And now the question is, can we have them in, not again laboratory cars, in our cars? The answer goes back to what are we putting in those cars, and if it's possible to bring again the cost down so much that we can afford to have them in any car. Again, the number on the cost of those sensors that is in those autonomous cars is probably $500,000. But is it possible to bring the cost of those sensors to $5,000? So one of the challenges in future is going to be sensors. So I'm going to list some of the challenges, and with any challenge there is an opportunity that we need to do, or we need to address those challenges in order to realize the future car or the ideal car. The first one is the integration of the local and global information. That's the key in order to manage to generate and establish crash-free cars. The second one is we definitely need new sensors. We need to have new sensors that are way, way more cost-effective. The other one is security. When we talk about talking cars to each other, if somebody once again hack into it, that's a bad thing, right? So we have to have a huge, huge security attached to it. The other thing is, when we think about, again, emission, we have to work more on engines. We have to develop better electric motors, batteries. We also have to work on new materials. We have to bring the mass of these cars much, much lower than they are now. And all these are possible if you think about what has happened and what is happening now. We are using aluminum, we are using magnesium, and now the new wave is going to be carbon fiber for cars. These are going to cut at least 50% of the mass of the cars, which bring again the fuel consumption dramatically lower. The other thing is new standards and regulations. If we really want to move in that direction, we also have to think about the new standards, the new regulations. So what I'm going to do is why Ontario is going to play a big role in this area. And obviously, depends on resources. We cannot be the best, and we cannot do everything in this province. But why vehicle, and why we can have a huge, huge role in the future of the ideal car? The first one is we have an excellent post-secondary and universities in this province. We do excellent world-class research now. The group that I have at the university is probably one of the largest automotive research in North America. My group is now 45 people, postdocs, engineers, technicians. And it has happened just because we have a capital, a human capital. We have all the possibility in order to address some of those challenges. The environment, we cannot do these research if the environment is not good enough. If you look at, again, our automotive sector in Ontario, there are over 120,000 people working in automotive in Ontario. In information and communication technology, there are over 280,000 people working in that area. So we do have the environment to achieve those goals. The other one is government has been very generous in working with university and providing funding to university to do those research. My group probably wouldn't have that number of people working in that research if there wasn't any funding from the government. That is important and a key factor in order to deal with those challenges. And the other one is we do have a very, very strong industry and university collaboration. Now, again, going back to Ontario, that oval that you see is almost 400 kilometers from Windsor all the way to Oshawa. And in that oval, almost 90% of the output of automotive industry in Canada coming out of that oval. 90%. And also when we think about information and communication technology, again, those are Ottawa, Toronto, and Waterloo are the main hubs of these things. So we have all the elements of being able to play a big role in the ideal car of the future. And here are some companies that are in Ontario that have a big role in the future of the car. And now, what is the idea of where we are going to be in 2030 related to ideal car? Yes, cars are going to be connected. We will have crash-free cars. Doesn't mean that all the cars are going to be crash-free. Number of zero-emission vehicles will be noticeable. Now, going back to what I said, 50,000 vehicles, electric cars that are sold in the US compared to 14.5 million. That is a drop in a bucket. But if we look at the rate of increase, in 2011, there was only 20,000 electric cars, and in 2012, that went up to 50,000. We should be able to address some of those challenges, and the biggest one is obviously the range anxiety. We should be able to address those. So we should see by 2030, again, the estimations are different, but we should see at least 10% of our cars are pure electric. We can, again, as I said, defy laws of physics. We cannot have 100% efficient cars, but we should be able to improve the efficiency of our vehicles by cutting the mass of our vehicles, by improving the engine efficiency, by improving our batteries, improving our electric motors. Now, I have mentioned that making cars more recyclable is going to be very, very challenging. The main reason is batteries are not that recyclable as other elements of the car. So that will be a huge challenge that we have to address. And the last one, cars providing both comfort and handling of a race car will be more affordable. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Amir. Next up, we have Donna Katsopoulos. I can't say for sure, but I doubt that many toddlers pass through any of the laboratories of those that we've spoken of thus far. The same can't be said for the work of Donna. A very young child today is going to be teetering on the brink of adulthood in 2030, and in her lab at Wilfrid Laurier University, Donna's research is how to best develop math skills in very young children. Her work provides new ideas about cognitive development and also helps us to have major implications for Ontario's continued economic prosperity. Please join me in welcoming Donna.
The mic on? There we go. Sorry, there's no pockets in this suit to be able to move around.
My research, along with my collaborator, Joanne Lee, focuses on early childhood learning of mathematics. And in a very real sense, our research has strong implications for 2030, because our research participants have the potential to be the future economic leaders, scientists, and innovators. And I'll go so far as to say the future Andrew Pellings. As many studies have shown, people who participate in mathematics-based disciplines have greater earning potential and more opportunities overall. And countries that progressively invest in mathematics-related disciplines indeed are working towards closing the gap between poverty and possibility. Not surprising, my interest in this area started with my own children. How would you like to receive that picture as the very first kindergarten picture coming home? When my eldest son, Evan, began kindergarten, I seriously thought he was brilliant. He was the only 4-year-old that I knew, so the fact that he could count, he could walk, he could talk, he could negotiate, he could recognize numbers was simply remarkable to me. And I seriously thought I had a genius on my hands. It came quite as a shock to me when his kindergarten teacher sat me in one of those little kindergarten chairs to tell me that Evan could not count. I'd heard him count to 30 and to 40. I'd watched him count objects, so I was convinced Mrs. Scott was wrong and my son's future was at serious risk. The reality was that he couldn't count. For Evan, counting was like reciting a poem. Give him a number of objects and he would just keep counting them, even if there was 3. He would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He'd keep repeat counting. So he's prone to counting objects 2 or 3 times. And when asked how many objects he counted, he had no idea. He would routinely respond his age. So not surprisingly, children who do not understand that the last number they said when counting a set of objects represents the total number in the set will also routinely give their age or the next number in the sequence when asked for the total. So for example, if they've counted 3 objects, they might say 4, or when you ask how many. Let me show you an example of this. This is Sammy at age 3, almost 4 actually. And when you talk to Sammy's mother, she said he's really good with numbers. He can count into the double digits, and she was really proud to show off his skills. So I'm going to ask you to watch Sammy count some of these rocks with me.
Sammy, can you count the rocks for me?
Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Very good. Can you count them again from this side?
Yep. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
7? Is there 7 or 8?
7 and 8.
7 and 8. Try counting them again, but this time move it when you count it. Say it, name it, and move it.
1.
Good.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
So how many is there?
8.
Good.
8.
Can you show me how many fingers? Show me 8 with your fingers.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Very good. And how old are you again, Sammy?
3 and 2/3.
3 2/3. Is 3 2/3 bigger than 3 1/2? Yeah. How old are you going to be next year?
It's a tough question.
4?
No, on my next birthday I'll be 4. On the next year, I think I'll be 8.
You think you're going to be 8?
Yep.
Okay.
So Sammy's having some challenges with what we refer to as one-to-one correspondence. You saw he was missing objects when he was counting or counting things twice. And the internet is actually full of video clips just like this, posted by very proud parents of their children counting incorrectly, despite the overwhelming evidence that children at this age should be able to count to 10 correctly. Let's look at another example. Here's a baby positioned across a room from 2 bowls of Greek cookies. In my culture, we prefer to feed babies cookies drenched in honey, covered with a little bit of walnuts rather than arrowroots. So this baby's positioned across the room from these cookies. Which one of these plates will the baby pick with remarkable consistency? What do you think? Yeah. 2. Let's try another one. So now there's 3 Greek cookies and 2 Greek cookies. Which plate will the baby pick with remarkable consistency? This demonstrates from about 6 months of age, babies understand the concept of more. And this is quite astounding. When we think about more or less and when does this actually develop cognitively, it's between 5, 6, 7 months of age that when given a choice, the baby will always select more. So what can we expect young children to do at the start of formal schooling? They should be able to count objects to 10 without counting or double counting. They should be able to identify numbers, to understand what it means to add and subtract. They should understand cardinality, so the total in the set. So when you ask them how many, they should be able to tell you. They should have an understanding of associativity. Object A plus object B is the same as B plus A. Ordinality, first, second, third, fourth. And inversion, so if we add a cookie to an apple and we take away the apple, we still have the cookie. Research has shown that children who come to school with these basic counting skills and arithmetic do better in mathematics from the onset of schooling, and this level of achievement is sustained over time. And recent neuroscientific research through Western University has shown that these very same basic skills and arithmetic skills are positively correlated with post-secondary achievement and placement tests. So what we're seeing are the very skills that children can come to school with at age 4 matter on achievement tests at the post-secondary level. The children have the potential to know much more mathematically before the start of formal schooling than we assume in our curriculum and in our policies. Other countries have different assumptions. Children in Asian countries outperform children from Western countries in mathematics from the start of formal schooling. This difference does not narrow with schooling, it widens. For some children, however, something very different is happening prior to formal schooling, something that capitalizes on the tremendous potential of the child's mathematical brain and continues to provide them with advantages over time. This difference is shown to be related more to environmental factors such as teaching and parenting and early childhood opportunities, rather than individual factors such as socioeconomic status and gender. In the West, given what we know children are able to do, but perhaps have not had the chance to do, either at home or in the daycare, schooling functions at the very onset as an intervention already for most children. In Canada, there is a concerning decline in participation of Canadian students in mathematics disciplines in post-secondary education. At the same time, we see an increase in international students participating in mathematics disciplines across Canada. And you'll note there's a very particular decline between the start of a degree in mathematics and the completion 4 years later. There are a lot of students leaving the studies, and this should be a very concerning phenomenon that's happening for all of us. Ontario and also in Canada is arguably already dependent on an international student population for many mathematics-related disciplines. I wonder what these trends will look like in 2030. If these trends continue, what will be the impact for Canada and for the global landscape? My belief, which is supported by growing research evidence, is that experiences in early childhood mathematics will have important implications for our individual and collective futures. My own research with my colleague Joanne Lee explores what we can be doing differently with young children and what are the impacts of doing something differently prior to formal schooling, particularly in that gap between when parental leave ends and when formal schooling starts. Currently, it is our belief that much of the child's brain is left dormant until they start school at age 4. There are some important lessons that can be learned from literacy education. In the province of Ontario, our standardized testing shows some interesting trends emerging. Literacy in Ontario schools has improved, but mathematics achievement has not. It has declined in some age groups and stayed stagnant at best. These results are not altogether surprising. The widespread emphasis both in the homes and schools has been on literacy. Literacy research, led by some outstanding researchers in our province, I might add, has actually changed how literacy is approached in schools and at home. To give you an example, think back for the individuals in this room today. How many of you had parents who read to you when you were a child? Or I'll phrase it a little differently. How many of you don't remember your parents reading to you as a child? Raise your hand. Yeah. The current culture of read to your child is a relatively new phenomenon, only about 20 years old. Yet this has had a profound effect on literacy rates and literacy participation, and the extension of literacy beyond the conventional school day into the home. It's been largely due to the advocacy and research in literacy development, education, and intervention. Unfortunately, the same is not true for mathematics education, not only in the home but in the school, and in Ontario and in many other places. It may surprise some of you to know that the teacher that's taught you elementary school mathematics, or the one teaching your children right now, likely has no post-secondary education in mathematics, and sometimes no secondary mathematics education beyond grade 10. Moreover, this teacher may have only a minimal number of secondary school mathematics courses. Perhaps less surprising is the widespread evidence that elementary teachers feel very unprepared and uncomfortable teaching mathematics, and if given the choice, would rather be teaching just about anything else. It's important to note that research shows that improving outcomes, mathematics outcomes, improves literacy outcomes. That's somewhat counterintuitive if you think about it. So if we invest in mathematics, we will see an improvement in literacy. The converse is not true, and we see that in the Ontario EQAO testing results that many of our children have participated in. Improving literacy does not improve mathematics outcomes, and our provincial results show just that. What you see is there's a steady incline in terms of reading across the grades 3, grade 6, grade 10, but what we see is a decline or a stagnant level across all grades in mathematics, and it's the decline that's very concerning. So what will mathematics education look like in 2030? I would hope that your child's teacher is someone that has a background much more than a grade 10 education, mathematics education. What will mathematics education policy look like in 2030? It will be a recognized priority across all education sectors, but I do hope this happens before 2030. Can I imagine a case where there will be an urgent interest in early childhood learning, recognizing the long-term implications to society, to science, to innovation, to the economy, to the gap between poverty and possibility? Definitely. As Senior Vice President and Chief Economist for TD Bank, Craig Alexander recently reported, for every dollar as a country that we invest in early childhood education, there's a return of approximately $1.5 to $3 and into the double digits for disadvantaged children, to our society, to the economy. The return to the individual and the society is indisputable when we invest in early childhood education, and particularly when we invest in mathematics education. I will close by saying that my son Evan is now a mathematics teacher. Underemployed, but nevertheless a mathematics teacher. He's a clear example that serious early intervention matters. And as a country, as a society, as a province, we should be very concerned with what's happening in mathematics education with our youth. It has incredible implications for 2030. Much of the work that my colleagues talked about in their amazing lectures this evening depends on the children that are participating in our studies right now, with my colleague Joanne Lee actually having a mathematics education that's worth having. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
We now have an opportunity for a few questions. If I could ask the other speakers to come up on the stage. So I know, of course, we've got the money-back guarantee that we have to be done by 8:30. But I think it's also important that we take an opportunity to see if there are some questions that the audience has for our researchers. Yes, Sandy.
Sorry,
Thank you.
miking up.
There, that's easier. So my daughter's she was last year in JK, she's in SK this year. What's your feeling about Ontario's move to play-based learning now, if we are supposed to have this early intervention for mathematics? They're certainly now even getting less, less routine, let's say, for school that way.
Is my mic working? Are we good? Okay. I think that there's been a really progressive move in early childhood to put the full day kindergarten in. In fact, it's a move in the right direction. The play-based learning, much like the curriculum when it was introduced in 1999, is in its infancy. I do have some concerns about it, there's no question, because what my research with Joanne is showing is that it's not enough to set up the play environments and watch the children play. There has to be some interaction from an adult to actually move their learning across a continuum. So you have to be able to pick up on those mathematical cues when the child is counting or engaging with objects or trying to engage in some patterning to actually check whether they are understanding what they're doing, check what sort of understanding you think that they have, or to move them along and advance their learning. I think that the play-based learning is really actually in its infancy. Joanne and I talk about purposeful play. So setting up those learning environments that allow the children to explore ideas in mathematics and in science, but actually require the teacher to have some sort of engagement to be able to check for understanding and advance the learning. And I'm hoping that it will move in that direction.
Thank you.
Question for AJ. What do you see happening with musical education coming up in schools in the year 30?
In 2030?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. What do I see happening in music education in the year 2030? I mean, my hope, again, since I've got this kind of optimistic perspective that I'm sharing with you today, my hope would be, from the point of view of my research, that improvisation is actually valued. Right now, improvisation tends to be looked at askance in terms of pedagogies, in terms of arts funding, in terms of support structures. It's seen as something that's just made up on the spot. There's no recognition for the deep history and the cultures of practice that go into it. And when it is taught, it's really kind of an afterthought, right? So maybe it's there as part of the jazz program, and you learn how to solo over a structure of chords. But really, there's no discussion about improvisation in terms of its role, its vital role in the history of jazz, in terms of its wider social implications. So I think for me, one of the things that I would hope for 2030 in terms of music education is that improvisation is actually valued.
Right. So this is a question for Andrew on the other end of the spectrum. So you're talking about biohacking, and there's a lot of, I'm a sci-fi buff as well, and I've been reading a lot of zombie fiction.
Yeah, me too.
So who do you think is going to win the post-apocalyptic race? Is it going to be the biohacker in the garage, or is it going to be the Department of Defense?
What a great question. Andrew.
And I'm glad it's going to Andrew.
That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately.
That's scary.
I would, well, if The Walking Dead's anything to go by, maybe it's just the zombies that win. Or, I kind of doubt it's the Department of Defense. I think it's a little too structured to deal with sort of random threats and things like that. And, look at social networks online. I mean, I think, Anonymous and these types of organizations, it's hard to deal with these people. And I think a really ultra rigid structure is not necessarily going to prevail against an unknown zombie apocalypse. Unless somebody's already thinking about it, but seriously anyway.
We have a question at the back.
I'm wondering if anyone on the panel remembers a Cuisenaire method of teaching arithmetic to primary and pre-primary children. This is a method of using colored rods, 10 of them, that are like pan pipes. And Cuisenaire was a Frenchman who was interested in music and math. I gather from what people have said, there's quite a nice connection between those two activities. In the 1960s, the elementary schools in Waterloo region, the public schools, were teaching Cuisenaire methods of math. And I had a grade 1 class that was part of the pilot program, and those children were adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing at age 6 very beautifully and successfully. And I wondered what happened to the method, or if you know about it.
Well, they're still in the cupboard.
It's in the okay.
I actually mean that as they're still available. We still use them. For example, at the Faculty of Education, they're routinely taken out to train teachers in terms of the exact things that you just described. Manipulatives have changed, though. We have those very same Cuisenaire rods that we're actually using on computer screens now, on handheld devices. And it's become, it's changed its form, but the concept and the role of those sort of manipulatives are still very much used.
Okay.
What's the really basic concept behind that?
It's units. So they use units as blocks to be able to subtract and add together.
Okay, and the colors?
The colors can create a little bit of a conceptual dissonance because the colors can mean nothing. It's really what you ascribe to them.
Oh, interesting.
There are families of colors. There's
families, exactly.
The red family and the green family and so on.
Yes, Bill? I'm going to just remind the audience before Bill speaks to questions, please keep them short. Bill's a prof at Laurier, who had the privilege of teaching me a long time ago.
I will keep it short. So my question is actually about rate of change, and maybe it's an unfair question, but I'm wondering what you would think about, would it be harder for you to predict the world in 2020 than the world in 2030? I'm just wondering how fast you see things changing. Is your prediction for 2030 sort of really the same as your prediction for 2020, or is it a different prediction?
Well, at least my perspective on this is how many breakthroughs we are going to see. The reason that we see a lot of changes in the past, maybe 10, 20 years, because we had some breakthroughs, and the biggest one was the communication. Are we going to see some of those in the next 10, 20 years or not?
It seems exponentially changing right now. You know, the Canadian government website, on there somewhere, you can find a surplus site where you can buy old equipment, scientific equipment and stuff like that. I just bought a device from the 80s for my lab that we re-engineered and got working again for $100. And the same thing is online right now. You can buy it from a company in the States for 19 grand, which is insane. But the computer that came with it had been updated to a 93 model, which was what I was messing with when I was a kid. And I mean, I knew that technology had advanced exponentially, but my goodness, I just could not. I was just stunned at the low-tech computer I had in front of me, but actually how well it worked. So, I mean, I really think it's going to be something else, and I hope we can actually really predict it. I would rather I can't wait to just live it, but I think it's going to be exponential.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Speaking along those same lines, what is going to happen when untold billions of people in the third world move to first world status in the next 20 years, thanks largely to research? with the depleting resources, water, you name it, pollution, environment, our species, to speak plainly, is in dire distress, and this is on the agenda of many researchers now. Do you have thoughts about how we might cope with this mass movement of knowledge into a higher level of society?
I'm sorry, I can't see where the speaker is. Okay. I think that speaks to what I talked about during my talk. There's an urgency for Canada to keep up and invest. And as we were answering the question about how soon will this happen exponentially, some of these things that we're talking about in 2030, it's painfully slow in terms of early childhood education. And in fact, it's critically dependent on the economy recovering and rebalancing itself so that we have governments that are willing to invest. But how do we compete? How do we deal with these situations in terms of Canada? And I think we'll be connected to how we invest not only in research but in education and early childhood education in particular.
I think I think it's a really good point, right? And I think actually your talk brought up some key issues, right? In terms of environmentalism and all of this, right? Can we make a renewable battery? Is it possible that's a recyclable battery even? Can we make recyclable cars? Are we going to encourage people, our children, to ask these questions and dream big?
I guess when it comes to pessimistic prediction, one thing that we forget is technology is changing. We learn how to solve problems. Again, I remember when I was a kid, at that time they were saying that in the next 10 years or 20 years there won't be any oil. Or in 10 or 20 years, again, the population is going to be so high that there won't be any food. But nothing happened. And if we look at what has happened, the cost of food in general, if we again add all the inflation and all other things, has gone down. Because we forget about the change in technology and how we can solve those problems. Again, as I said, with technology and engineering, we do research to develop something to answer something that we needed, right? And again, at this time, we do not know how. The question is to find a solution. So I really do not have any of these dark prediction that we are going to be out of food, we are going to be out of resources. No.
Or we'll be out of mathematicians.
Or out of mathematicians.
I'll go on the record.
Fan, time for one more question.
Everybody loves
My line of work is building construction related. And I'm wondering if there's any research being done to link biohacking to building construction.
I mean, I know I've actually talked over the years and had many conferences with architects and people like that who are, I don't know if there's anything that exists, but that are interested in two aspects really: bio-inspired designs, take advantage of the amorphous and very flexible and adaptive structures you find in biology, as well as creating new materials that are, again, inspired by the design principles you find in biology. So, I mean, I'm not sure that really fits into biohacking, but there's certainly a lot of work in many areas where the design principles from biology are being exploited, and the more we understand them by playing these games that we do in our lab, I think the more people are going to find applications for these things.
That's great. Well, I did want to take an opportunity to thank you for sharing your evening with us. A couple of final comments, then I'm going to ask George Dixon to come up and say some final words. So, I mean, I thought that this evening was fascinating, and I wanted to thank each and every one of you for coming out this evening. It reminds me of a couple of things. Someone today reminded me of one of their first jobs when they got a job selling a fax machine. And he said, do you remember when, the first person told you could put a piece of paper into this machine and of course it would come out at the other end exactly the same, and how much disbelief there was. And we think in our short period of time how quickly things have changed. So I think this notion of exponential change is something that is very, very real and very much upon us. You know, I can remember working in telecommunications, and they said, well, there's physical limitations. There's physics associated with things such as copper and how much data you can put back down it. And then, of course, you know, we changed the rules. And I think there's so many frontiers of science right now, whether it's in the nano or the quantum area, that are going to change fundamentally the way that we think about rules, which governed our thinking, our imagination, and what we thought would be the possible. And I'll just make one final comment, and then I'll get George up here. Of course, when we try and think about the future, there's a lot of great quotes out there. One of the most famous, of course, is going to be a lot like today, but different. But one of my favorite is, and I believe it was Peter Thiel, the founder of PayPal, said, you know, I thought the next big breakthrough was going to be a flying car, and it turned out to be 140 characters. And so that's the other great thing, is that it's going to surprise us. It's going to be exponential. Hopefully it's going to be social, hopefully it's going to be innovative, but it's definitely going to surprise us. So thank you again for joining us this evening. I'm going to get George to come on up.
Thanks, Ian. It's been a very interesting evening. Biohacking. I think I call that proteomics and bioinformatics and data mining.
Yeah, 10 years ago, yeah.
That's just a generational thing about what you call it, which is probably the most important thing I learned tonight. The activities that we've been undertaking tonight are really, a lot of it has been organized by COU, the Council of Ontario Universities. And the group that Abby and Kevin and I and Mona come from is called the Ontario Council of University Research. But we respond to this other group called the executive heads of the Council of Ontario Universities. And those are the presidents, effectively, of the universities. And one of the presidents is here this evening. I'd like to make a few comments. Can I introduce Feridun Hamdalapur, who's the president of the University of Waterloo. Feridun.
Thanks, George, and thanks, Council of Ontario Universities, for a fabulous evening. And I just sat there and listened to my colleagues' presentations. That was fantastic. And can you imagine an environment that I am privileged to be in, and many of my other colleagues to be in there, to see hundreds, if not thousands, of similar activities taking place. And this is the kind of environment that our students are exposed to. They are learning together with all these discoveries and new ideas, and this is fabulous. As a former member of OCUR, I remember the day that we discussed research matters, and we thought that it was our obligation to let our public in general to know what's happening at our universities, because after all, we're using your tax dollars mostly to fund these projects, and you had the right to know what was going on. So I'm very, very pleased to see that OCUR and COU took this initiative, and they are going around the province and telling everybody about these wonderful, life-changing research projects that we are undertaking at universities. 17 years from now, life is going to be quite different. 17 years ago, I could not have predicted what's happening today. 17 years ago, I wouldn't be able to tell you that the number of universities in China would be in the thousands. The number of PhD students coming out of China will be in the order of 10,000s. The number of scientific papers in biotechnology and bio areas in China will be the highest in the world. They will come and surpass the ones in the United States and the UK. This is the world that we are in right now. 17 years ago, I was walking around and showing off with my, I can't even remember the name of the device that I had that will tell me somebody called, go call that number. It doesn't exist today. I can't even remember what it's called today. It's going to be exponential. I'm very, very proud that the universities in Ontario are making a big difference. You've seen the best prime example of these, and we will continue doing that. Thanks again, COU, our colleagues from Council of Ontario Universities. They are here, and I'm really glad that we all had this opportunity to listen to our colleagues' wonderful work, and we are looking forward to hearing more about these. In 2030, it may not happen, but in 2100, I just liked it. 2100, I just like to come back for one day, okay, and see what the world is like. And I hope that I won't see a car that day. Thank you.
Thanks, Ferdinand. Of course, in truth, we don't know what life is going to be like in 2030. And in some ways, the most important part of this activity is thinking about what it should be in 2030 and trying to achieve that and move in that direction. From a philosophical perspective, you'll see some people that from a technological basis claim that the only thing that limits what the human species can do are the natural resources available and the imagination to actually figure out what you want to achieve, and then you can go and achieve it. We are lucky enough to live in a society that is sufficiently wealthy and sufficiently free that we can actively explore what imagination brings us and what life will look like in 2030. And that's a huge privilege moving forward. We've seen 4 presentations today about research and scholarship in the academic community. 4, okay? It's 21 universities, thousands of faculty members. To say that we've scratched the surface, we're not even a micron down into the surface layer here when we look at this type of activity. And the discussions that we have today, we've really only started a conversation. It's going to continue. If you look up here, there are some events that are scheduled going forward in Sudbury, Oshawa, St. Catharines, and Toronto. I would actually suggest you might want to follow the website about the event in St. Catharines, because the rumor is it's going to be held in a winery. And I find that good research and good wine often tends to go together quite well. You can follow the activities that we're going to be undertaken going forward on both Facebook, Twitter, and the website. The different hashtags and addresses are around me. As I said, this is the start of a conversation. Go on to these different social media entities and follow that. Don't forget to fill in the ballots that have been circulated around. I think somebody stole my comment about the fact that you're probably sitting on them at the moment. They'll be nicely limbered up now so you can write on them. Pass those in on your way out the door, and we will actually be using that material and posting it on the website and on the social media portals so that you can follow the outcome of this evening's event. On behalf of Abby, Kevin, and Mona, and all of Ontario's researchers, I'd like to all thank you for coming this evening. I was going to say it's a beautiful evening out there to be doing something, but actually I'd be lying. It's probably a lot better to be in here in a nice warm auditorium. I would also like to thank Ian Klugman and Mayor Zaire for coming out this evening and supporting this initiative. Finally, I would like to thank the researchers that have presented our very interesting stories tonight. Donna, Andrew, Ajay, and Amir, thank you very kindly. There's probably a great number of people that I've forgotten to thank. There are a number of colleagues that have worked very hard at pulling this event together. Thank you very kindly. It's late. Have a good evening. Safe trip home.